we are going to be talking about another French player who plays for Cholet in the LMB, and that is Tidjane. I may be butchering his first name, but we're getting the last name right this time. We literally listened to the game audio before we came on. Salaun. Um, and he is someone who is listed at 6'9", but there's been a lot of talk about him being bigger than that. And when I watched the LMB tape, to be honest, he does look a little bit bigger than Zachary. Maybe maybe that's just me being complete Spurs fan bias. I heard that on Twitter and now I'm like seeing it in real life, even though it's not really the case. But I genuinely think maybe it is just my biases. But from what I saw, he does look a little bigger than Rasache. At the least, he is bigger weight wise, even if he's not, even if they both end up being 6'9", but he does look a little bit taller than him as well on the court. And there's even been rumors of him being as big as 6'11". So that's kind of what matches up with this. Maybe he's a little bit in the middle, say 6'10". It doesn't really matter. The point is there's a lot of potential at his size and just with his frame in general. It's not just height. It's also his build as well. And Ethan, there has been a lot of talk about the Spurs potentially being interested in him. Andrew Lopez, if you have grown up on the Spurs, you remember when he was like a Spurs, he was really, on a Spurs reporter. He kind of took some time off. How do I describe this? When the Spurs started losing, after the Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu era, he kind of took some time off and really went and focused on the Pelicans with Zion. But now that Wemby's back, of course, he's moved back to San Antonio and being, the main ESPN, NOLA and San Antonio correspondent. But here's what he says. Givony, I know I got that wrong in the in the mock draft. I apologize for that, y'all. But Jonathan Givony talks about the Spurs at number 8 being a real possibility for Tidjane Salaun. Here's what Victor Wembanyama told ESPN in January about Salaun. I can trust this guy to get better and work out like crazy. But that wasn't the only thing that was said about the Spurs and Tidjane Salaun. I couldn't get this to pull up as a graphic, so I'm just going to read it here, Ethan. But here's what Givony said from his intel after the mock draft, or after the lottery. Or I think this was actually at the Combine. I know I just mentioned like 3 things. Combine and after the lottery. After talking with numerous NBA teams about Salaun this week, it seems he's much closer to being a top 10 pick than the late lottery candidate he is currently ranked in the ESPN Top 100 at number 10. Several teams are flagging the San Antonio Spurs at number 8 as a real potential landing spot for Salaun. The French connections with Victor Wembanyama are obvious, as the two share an agent and have known each other dating back to 2017 when their sisters played together on the France FIBA U16 European Championship team. And I believe that even Zachary might have been a part of that group as well. Maybe it was Seedy, but the point is there was like all of the French players know each other. That's what I'm trying to get. And a lot of the French players' sisters also played together. So whenever there was a FIBA championship with them going on, Victor talked about this, I believe, in the interview with Kevin O'Connor, but one of the interviews he did recently, he said like they would just hang out like whenever their sisters were playing because they go travel to support and they didn't have anything to do. They were all the same age. They all played basketball. So they've known each other for a really long time. So there's definitely some personal connections there. But Ethan, I'll just dish it to you as we round out the episode with this segment. What did you see when you dove into his tape? What are some strengths and weaknesses, as well as his potential fit in San Antonio?
I mean, the fit is apparent, right? He's 6'9", 6'10", power forward, extremely versatile, has a lot of upside. The fact that he's French is also, I see it as a positive, especially I'm sure the Spurs do, considering Victor Wembanyama is our centerpiece. Obviously, he's very raw. He only averaged 9 points, 4 rebounds a game last year during the regular season. He's very young. He's only shooting, 32% from 3?
33, yeah.
33. I don't think his jump shot looks broken. I think it maybe could use a little bit of tinkering. I think at the top especially, it looks a little funny at the apex, just a little funny, but it's smooth. There's no hitch in it, so I don't know if it'll be a difficult fix. He has the potential to be a really high-level defender, a switchable defender. He's athletic. I think he moves laterally very smooth. I think he could potentially guard 3, 4, 5, maybe not 2. Um, it's hard for me to judge it fully because anytime I see a raw, solid defense player with a lot of versatility, I immediately want to compare him to Jeremy Sohan, right? That's like the natural inclination for me as a Spurs fan is like he's like a Jeremy comp, but he's not quite the same as
No.
Jeremy.
Yeah.
Uh, he's a little smoother. I feel like he's way rawer than Jeremy was even coming out of college, more athletic. He's a conundrum to me, Jude. I'm going to be honest. I didn't get to watch too much tape. I was really just reading stats and trying to gather information from other draft profiles on the internet. But even these guys that are considered professionals kind of have varying opinions of this guy. Like I saw one that was like he's a bad rebounder, doesn't have a nose for the ball, and then literally 3 clicks later, I found another guy that was like has the potential to be a high level rebounder. It's like, okay, which one is it? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I think he's got a high motor. From what I saw from his the little tape that I watched, but I really want to get your opinion on him because I feel like you had more time to really dive in yourself and get your own perspective. So let me hear what you're thinking. And am I on the right track?
In the sense that he's a conundrum, like I'm trying to figure out how I want to word this. I don't want to say he's Giannis, but when I bring up Giannis, I mean in the sense that he's he's a player with a lot of potential, very raw, that you're taking a high upside swing on. You know
Right.
what I mean? That's what I mean. Like, I'm not even necessarily saying they're games. I'm just meaning as prospects. Like, they are kind of similar in a way. And I think that's probably why he's surging a little bit later in this draft process because he was, for most of the draft process, he was kind of around like the late teens, kind of 15 and under, kind of right after the lottery ends. But going into the tape, like you said, because I did get to watch a good 20 minutes of him, the jumper is actually what stands out to
Really?
me. Yes. And I saw there was some talk about that in the comments. This goes back to what Lou said last week. Don't look at the percentages. And especially in the LNB. Look, I know he's not Victor, but Victor shot sub 30% in the LNB last year.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like and he's at 33. And that's really, I mean, there are a lot of catch and shoot jumpers on his offensive tape. Like if you look up his offensive highlights, you go to the no ceilings and there's like 9 minutes of offensive highlights. A ton of that is catch and shoot jumpers. And I like the way that the jumper looks. It is smooth. But I do understand what you're saying about the little bit of maybe like there might need to be some work there. There's a reason he's at 33% too. But I mean, that was not when I went into his tape, I was not expecting to see a dude who looks like a sniper. And that's really what I saw. And I know that's the highlights. Like, I know there's obviously if you look at the negative tape too, you can find misses and whatnot. But really when I dove into it, Ethan, that's what I noticed the most of offensively. You talked about Jeremy and you said that he was a little bit different, and I agreed. He can put the ball on the floor better than Jeremy as of right now, even. Um, his handle is tighter. He can put his shoulder down and muscle through guys if he wants to. Um, there's flashes of off ball movement too, where he's cutting. Where a guy there was one play where a guy like drives in and kind of gets like congested in the lane, and it's hard to describe where he was. He was on the left side of the court and the dude's driving in towards the elbow and he's kind of like hovering in the mid range. That's how I describe it. So kind of a little bit too close to him, to be honest. Like the spacing was jumbled. But once he realized that that the guy driving in, his point guard driving in, got stopped by two guys, he realizes he can kind of fade closer to the baseline and then cuts inside under the basket, and the dude finds him under two defenders. He catches it, gets a dunk. So, there's some high IQ, even though that wasn't necessarily the prettiest possession, as you could kind of tell while I was describing it.
Mm.
He had the wherewithal to understand, like, hey, even though this is kind of jumbled right now, if I make this move and fade out this way, because he's double teamed, I can get an easy dunk under the rim. He can finish through contact.
Mm,
Um, with all of this being said, Ethan, I completely agree with you saying he's very raw. Like these are just all, they're all flashes at the end of the day. And I don't think his stats were the exact same as were Sachet. Um, and I'm sorry that I don't remember those off the top of my head. I did look at them, but they're escaping me as of right now. Um, and that's probably because they didn't stand out that much.
right.
Um, so getting back to like calling him a conundrum in the sense, are all of these flashes going to translate? Like that's the question with him. But here's the thing I will say: he's playing for Cholet. And for any of you Wemby lovers who were watching the LNB playoffs last year during his finals run, Metropolitans 92 and Victor, you remember the series with Cholet. And that team is one of the Lou mentioned it last week on the pod. They're one of the best teams in France. They have a long history. They have a crazy fan base too. Like, I mean, it is high intensity environments when you're playing for them. And he just had a 19-8 game in the LNB playoffs recently. I know that's not 20-10, but it's pretty dang close. You
Right.
know, and so you're talking about the rebounding thing. From what I saw, I don't think he's a bad. And I know those are just two guys. You're doing your research, Ethan,
Right.
and you're just seeing the differences between those two. You know what they're saying, and that's kind of making you confused. I mean, I even if he's not like I to be honest, I don't know if I necessarily agree with either of them, but he's definitely not like can't rebound. I disagree with that one. Like maybe he's never like in all, the other side of it, like what you saw, like an
Mhm.
all-time great rebounder, but he's too much of a physical presence. Um and plays with effort too. Like, and with that being said, I'm not seeing him like doing cleanup duty a bunch either, but he's definitely someone who like he's not a terrible rebounder. That's what I'll say. That and I think that's like for sure.
I think the other negative that I read, and I don't know if you can tell this from the tape that you watched, but they said that playmaking is not going to be his thing right off the bat. Like he still needs to figure out a feel for the game. Sometimes we'll get lost, especially when he has the ball, as far as like finding open teammates, finding cutters. But like you said, when he without the ball is moving without the ball, high IQ player. It's just when he has the ball. Maybe that needs more development. I don't know if you
I
saw.
can see that. I can definitely see that. I didn't really see a ton of playmaking highlights from him. It's either like catch and shoot jumpers or he's taking somebody off the dribble, putting his shoulder into him and getting a bucket at the rim. Or like I said, the off-ball stuff. But I mean, like I said, catch and shoot is an off-ball play too. Um, I'm trying to think. Really, I mean, the thing that stands out to me, Ethan, when I think about his highlights is the catch and shoot jumpers. I wish I had more to say with that,
Mhm.
like more offensive analysis, but a lot of it really was that. And like I said, definitely can use his physicality driving inside and, has a solid handle. Like, I'm not saying that he's going to come into the NBA and he's going to be Allen
Right.
Iverson, but I think he is at like a significantly ahead of like a Jeremy Sohan, for example, when it comes to just, you know, um,
Handling the ball.
yes, and specifically, like, you see a lot of these taller players, the ball like bounces up, all the way to their chest. We saw that with Jeremy, and we saw how much of a problem that was this year. You don't see that with him. The ball stays below his waist, and that was something I noticed on his drives. Um, and I mean, he's got a little bit of some crossover moves too, but I think he's really kind of just coming into his potential, which is why you're kind of seeing like the 19-8 games now. Like I want to say that that's one of his highest, one of his better statistical games of the season. And that's starting to kind of happen now in the playoffs, but that's also telling. And the fact he's getting those minutes on a team like Cholet, which would be the equivalent of I mean, they didn't win the championship last year. Or did they? Maybe they did. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. I think Metropolitans 92 actually beat them in like the semifinals. But the point is they're like they're a perennial playoff team in France. They don't like to lose. That's why their fan base is, as crazy as they are also.
Mm.
So for him to be performing in that situation, and on Cholet specifically, I think that's another thing that is a just a bonus, a plus for him, as a prospect.
I would agree with that. Only thing I'll say, just to play devil's advocate, as far as us drafting him at 8, if that's, I believe, where everyone assumes we might take him at 8. Um, if he is as raw as we're both saying, and he might need a year in the G League, or he might need a year just not being in the rotation. And I don't know if there's all going to be a lot of Spurs fans or even the Spurs front office that want to use the 8th pick on someone that's not going to play for a year um, or more.
Well, I don't mean to interrupt you here, Ethan. We mentioned Cody Williams earlier.
I think he would play though.
I understand where you're coming from, but remember we were talking about this with Lou, and even
Yeah.
Kevin O'Connor said it too. He could be a guy that a lot of people view as 2 years away from being
Right.
2 years away. And remember, he even said like if you draft Cody Williams and you understand like first year, it's not really going to be anything crazy. To me that kind of insinuates that he probably would be in the G League too. With that being said, because Cody Williams plays at Colorado, I think he is just more of a sure thing than Tidjane. Um, but we know from Wemby that he has a work ethic. That is one thing we do know.
True that. True that. You cannot underestimate that Frenchman work ethic.
You can't, and I mean, if he's saying that about him, like he's a guy that he could trust, to work hard every day and continue to get better. I think that also ties into another one of Lou's points when he was talking about Stephon Castle, and he said, "Don't look at the percentages, just trust the work ethic."
Mm-hmm.
You could make that argument for Tidjane. I think I'm trying to think of because obviously highlights are highlights. When I think of negatives for him, I think, you could, if you want to hit on the shooting percentage, I just really didn't see that. And with what I saw from Victor, and I know they're completely different players, but what I've seen from a lot of teams. I mean, we talked about Tyrese Maxey last week, Ethan, too. Like he was a sub 30% 3-point shooter in college. Like from what I saw, I think the jumper, and maybe that's just wide open catch and shoot jumpers. A lot of people can hit those. Champagny can hit those at a high rate. But I really did see that a lot from him in the tape that I watched. But maybe there's, the ones that if I see some of the other things about his shot, maybe there's some shot mechanic things that he can fix. Looking at more of the negative highlights, maybe I would have a little bit of a different perspective there. But to think about things that he can get better at, I would say playmaking. I think that is something that I did not see a lot of when it came to the highlights, as much as there were some flashes of off-ball movement, being able to find players, when he's just driving to the basket, kind of trying to be a physical presence. It kind of, as we're talking about this, Ethan, it kind of reminds me of Keldon a little bit. As much as we love our boy Keldon, and we saw Keldon have more assist games this year, but think about like Keldon first coming into the league,
Right.
where he's just barreling inside. He ain't thinking about passing. You know what I mean? Like back in the bubble. That's kind of how I would equate where Tidjane is at right now. Man, I wish I had. I'm sure there's some times where he's got beat defensively. But really, I mean, I saw a lot of potential. Like when I was watching him, I was like, as I said, I think to even earlier in the stream, or I don't know if I said this to open this up, but when Lou said he didn't feel like there was that much of a gap
Mm-hmm.
between Rasache and Salaun, I understand where he's coming from. With that being said, Tidjane is not putting up the exact same numbers as Zachary is right now, nor has he been as consistent throughout the season. But when we're just talking about complete upside potential, like that's why I brought up the Giannis thing earlier. If Tidjane hits, I'm not saying he's gonna be honest, but he could be somebody who could really develop into like a physical presence, whether that's at the 3 or the 4. With his height, I think he definitely could play the 4, and with his size as well, and strength. If everything develops with him, like he really could. I mean, I don't want to say he could be an all-star, but like he could be a gem. He could be a hidden gem in this class. And I think the word is starting to get out a little bit, which is why he's becoming more of a late lottery selection where he's been more later in the teens kind of throughout the process this year.
Well, I'll finish the Tidjane discussion with if there's anybody in the comments from France or anyone that has seen him firsthand and can kind of tell us maybe some of the negatives that we're just not seeing from the highlights, please let us know in the comments section. We will gladly look over those in our own time and for the next video as well as we approach the draft. And I also wanted to think real quick out loud.
No, you're good.
Giannis is the ideal, right? Who is Giannis in the league right now that's like, have you seen those memes where it's like Jason Tatum is the LeBron James of Tobias Harris's?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Who's the bad version of Giannis, but like same style of play, kinda, or maybe not even bad, just like more realistic version of Giannis in the league. Can you think of any names?
There's one name that pops into my head, but it's not a good answer for this conversation.
I got one too, but you go first.
Well, like I said, this one's not. This is actually a better comp for Tidjane now that I think about it.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Okay. Well, this is not. Ignore the Giannis part of this question, but Nikola Jovic for the Heat, I think that like a bigger Nikola Jovic, I think that is a good like comp, I guess you could say for Tidjane coming into the league. I mean, and we'll see, what his potential is. But we saw Jovic kind of, play well in a couple. I don't know if that was that in the playoffs. No, I'm thinking of Jaime. I think I'm getting him confused with Jaime. Did he play in the playoffs a little bit?
Nikola, yeah, very, very briefly at the end of the series.
Okay, yeah, then that's not what I'm thinking. I'm just thinking he had some other games during the regular season then where he had some, close to 20 points and hit a bunch of threes. And he's kind of that same. He's skinnier, thinner than Tidjane, but that's kind of the mold that I would put him in, to be realistic and not be too big for my britches here.
Right. I like some of the comments here. Jonathan Isaac, Bruno Caboclo, low key Franz Wagner. A name I'll throw out there. I guess this more so works for a Giannis, like a lesser version of Giannis than maybe a comp for old boy. But what's his name? Scotty Barnes.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. I see what you're saying. There's a lot of there's some similarities between these guys, physicality wise,
That's what I was thinking.
and the
Right?
way that they can put the ball on the floor. I would probably I was about to say Tidjane's a more natural shooter than Scotty.
Scotty was stroking that thing.
How can I not forget like the first week of the season when he just went completely ballistic on us from three in the second half? Do you remember that game?
It was him and OG Anunoby, man. They went absolutely crazy.
OG had one last game before he went to New York that he
We
had.
had the entire country of Canada in our comments giving us crap. Remember that? It was like one of our most viewed videos this season. Canada was going crazy on us because I think I said like OG Anunoby's not a sniper. I think it's like a
He
quote.
was, yeah.
He was like 6 for 8, and I was like, Canada was letting me have it.
Oh my gosh! And now you see, when he's playing on the Knicks when he was healthy, it's even more open shots for old OG. But yeah, I see the Jonathan Isaac, Franz Wagner. I can see that to an extent. It's hard for me as much as I do think his ceiling's really high. This is such a NBA like YouTube thing to do, Ethan. But he's a high variance guy. Like his floor could be really low, but his ceiling could be really high.
I got a good floor for him.
Go ahead.
Floor DeJuan Blair.
Oh my gosh.
He could be DeJuan Blair, and he could be Giannis Antetokounmpo.
When I brought up the Giannis thing, like I don't think that like he's gonna be the same player as Giannis, but I think if everything works out for him, like there's a slim chance that he could maybe develop into an all-star. But you could say that about so many players in this draft is the other thing, Ethan.
That's what we started this with, and I figure that's a really good and poetic way to kind of finish off this draft conversation.
And I was doing some other stuff too, or I was having a conversation with somebody when I was watching his highlights. So that might have also, kind of taken away a little bit from some of my other takeaways. Cause I was just trying, but really, man, like I think even if I went back and watched it, I would just see him, hitting catch and shoot jumpers, then occasionally taking guys off the dribble, using his strength and physicality inside to get a layup, or get a dunk if he drives past somebody. I'm not really seeing him clean up, on the boards. I will say, and offensively, when I say that, defensively, I did see him, get some boards and go coast to coast in transition, from time to time. And now that I'm thinking about it, Ethan, I said I didn't really see too much playmaking. It's kind of popping into my head a little bit more. I mean, there were some, but even when I'm remembering the playmaking a little bit, that's still probably an area where he can improve. And he does look a little bit jumbled at times. It's not like a smooth, like he definitely can't, like right now, he can't like operate out of the pick and roll or anything. It's more like you kind of alluded to earlier, he gets himself in a jumbled situation and then he kind of has to pass out of it. And maybe that works into an assist because, two guys tried to trap him, to frustrate his dribble. And,
Right.
and that just leaves somebody open. Um, and yeah, I mean, like I said, I wish I had more analysis kind of on that. But defensively, I mean, obviously in highlights, you're going to see good plays. I'm sure there's other ones where he's gotten taken advantage of, but offensively, that was kind of what I saw from him. And then defensively, even though I did just reference, I'm sure there are plays where he's got taken advantage of. There's a lot of flashes there too. But it really, Ethan, it all just comes down to athleticism and frame. Those are the things with him. And then you do see shooting ability, which is nice. You see flashes of that. So that's why I think he's the upside swing. He's got all of the athleticism and, you know, size aspects, to be a modern four in the league. But
Mm.
is that all going to come together? Is it going to translate? We just have to see it play out. But I will say, after this is the last thing I'll say on this, Ethan. I'll end this off with this. After diving into his tape, I see why there are conversations about the Spurs potentially taking him. And also, I wouldn't be mad at it. I really wouldn't. Especially if we get like a Castle at 4, who's, going to be more of a sure thing. This kind of goes back to what Lou was talking about. If we have, more of a sure thing there, that kind of allows us to take an upside swing on a Tidjane Salaun. But also, once again, I really like Cody Williams. We can talk about him in another episode, but I've become a lot higher on him as the season has gone on. And I do think that if we're going to go with an upside swing, as much as I love the French connection between this guy, and, I'm sure the Spurs have done their scouting reports, and it's great that him and Wemby have been friends, since they were teenagers. If I had to pick between what I'd feel more comfortable with, if we're going with an upside swing at 8, I would go with Cody Williams.
I would agree. And to add anything else would be uncivilized. So